Welcome back, everyone. This is the scariest unsolved mystery of our time. If there was a bus that came at exactly midnight to take you away forever, would you ride it? Well, it turns out that there is. And if you do take this bus, you may never return. Welcome to the terrifying story of the Midnight Bus. Our story begins in a town in Northern Ireland. The year is 2007. A person known only as Gary has just arrived home after a night of drinking. He lives in the countryside, so he hit the bottle with some friends after work, then took a cab home. Now, stumbling drunk, Gary decides to walk home, only he's mistaken how close he is to his house. In fact, he's still over a mile away. So he continues walking down the dark road, when suddenly a bus appears behind him. It was an old double-decker bus, the kind that you might have seen in old-school movies. It had no destination sign on the front, and the windows were completely dark. But Gary was too drunk to care and needed a seat. So he walked right up to the bus and got on board. He looked around for a seat, eventually finding one right at the very back of the bus. No one else was on board, and the driver didn't say a word. As the bus pulled away from the stop, Gary became concerned. The driver was driving extremely slowly and erratically, making frequent stops, even though there were no other houses near the road. Then, worst of all, Gary realized that he had no idea where they were going. After 15 minutes, Gary realized something terrible. He did recognize this road. In fact, he'd passed it earlier when he left his friend's house. They were going in circles. Then Gary noticed something incredible. The clock on the wall said 11:58 p.m. This was not good. Gary knew that his house was just a few more minutes' walk away. And as the bus continued to drive past his house, he started to panic. When the clock struck midnight, the bus lurched forward. Gary braced himself, but then he heard a horn honk outside of the bus window. Looking out, Gary saw nothing but darkness. And when he turned to the driver, he saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring straight ahead. The bus continued to move forward, now at high speed. Gary could hear leaves crunching under the tires as the bus drove into the forest. Then everything went black. The bus had crashed. Gary awoke to find himself in a dark room. At first, he couldn't remember what had happened. Then the events from the night before came flooding back to him. He struggled to free himself from the seatbelt, then ran to the door and flung it open, only to find that it wouldn't budge. He tried to call for help, but his phone had no signal. As he looked around the room, Gary noticed that he wasn't alone. There were dozens of seats in front of him filled with sleeping passengers. Then he looked out the window and realized with a growing sense of dread that it was daytime. It had been morning the entire time. Panicked, Gary ran to another window and banged on it, screaming for help, but no one could hear him. As he looked out, he realized that the trees outside of the window were unlike any that he had ever seen before. They were old and twisted and seemed to be reaching for him. And that's when Gary realized that he'd made a horrible mistake getting on that bus. Now, this story sounds absolutely insane. But we've actually had many reports of buses like this that appear in the middle of nowhere and take people away. The thing is, most of us are smart enough not to get on a random bus that shows up in the middle of the night. But sometimes people make mistakes, or they get way too drunk, and can wind up boarding these buses without knowing it. And once they do, they never come back. And if you look online, you'll find plenty of people claiming that they've seen these buses. One man named David wrote, "I was at university and it was about 3 a.m. and I was walking home from a friend's house and there was a bus stop nearby. I don't know what possessed me to look, but I looked on the bus and saw an old couple sitting on the seats. As I approached, I saw that the windows were pitch black and the bus was ancient. I thought, wow, those poor people. I hope they get somewhere soon. And then I realized that there was no street light and the windows weren't windows, they were eyes." One woman named Amelia wrote, "I was waiting for my boyfriend at a bus stop at 1 a.m. and he was late. I decided to go home because I was freezing cold and I hadn't wrapped up warm. Just as I began to cross the road, a bus came barreling towards me. I couldn't get out of the way in time, and I just stood there frozen. I looked up and saw that there were no lights on inside the bus and no destination sign outside. The doors opened, and a woman stood in the doorway beckoning for me to come inside. She looked like an old hag and had one eye. I turned and ran, then I looked back and she was gone." And these stories aren't just from the United States. People have reported seeing these buses all over the world. In fact, back in 2011, There was a news report from Scotland that detailed the appearance of a ghost bus. The bus was captured on camera driving through the streets of Edinburgh, Scotland. And eyewitnesses claimed that the bus appeared out of thin air, then disappeared after a few hours. But perhaps the craziest case of the midnight bus ever came in 2013. A young filmmaker named Jack decided to make a video about the local legend of the midnight bus. In the video, Jack explained the myth of the midnight bus, showing clips of the news stories while he narrated. He then said that he wanted to see the bus for himself. So he headed to the local bus stop with a camera crew and set up camp. Jack spent all night filming, expecting the worst. At first, nothing happened. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Their camera began picking up strange electromagnetic energy. Then an old bus appeared in front of them. As the camera panned across the bus, we can see that it was completely empty. But that wasn't the weirdest part. As the camera focused on the driver's seat, we can see that the driver was missing. But the bus was still moving forward. It was driving on its own. Jack and his crew were terrified, but they continued to film. Then suddenly the bus stopped and the doors opened. One of the crew members stepped forward and knocked on the door. No one answered. Then they opened the door and stepped inside. The bus was still moving forward, driving down the road by itself. Jack and his crew ran from the bus, tripping and falling to the ground. They watched as the bus disappeared down the road, and Jack took off running after it. The last shot is of Jack running with the bus in the distance, followed by the text. No one saw them again. It's really quite scary. And even though this was supposed to be a mockumentary, it's hard to tell. For all we know, Jack and his crew really did get on that bus and disappear. Or maybe they really did see a ghost bus driving down the road on its own. Whatever the case may be, this is definitely one creepypasta that will keep you from getting on any random buses anytime soon. Now before we go, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever seen a midnight bus? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more short videos like this one, stay tuned. But as always, thanks for watching. I've been your host. And until next time, stay safe.